What's up, Bass Campers? Today I wanted to walk you through a template I kind of created for you guys. Not much of a template, more of a project that I put together. Just a quick little drop idea, because I wanted to address some people's requests for like a mixing template, but I don't think I could create like a mixing template necessarily, because every song I create has a different type of approach that I take to the mixing. So I just figured I'd make a drop for you guys and then let you break it down and ask me any questions you might have. So here's the drop I made.
I'm still on.
Cool. So I'm going to break this down real quick. What's going on here? I think the most important part of this project is this ghost kick rack. And essentially what it is, it's just side chaining things due to these MIDI notes, and I've just matched them up with the drum hits. So like if you listen just the drums here, you can see that the ghost kick's hitting on the kicks and the snares. And there's ways you can copy this up easily, but I just drew these in for the purpose of this tutorial. So you can do what you like, but yeah, you just come in here and you draw notes for the ghost kick. And what's happening here is I have all of the bass sounds and everything else in this rack, and that's all being sidechained by two sidechain compressors to just give it a little bit more pump. One with a quicker release time to really just dig into the first hit of the kicks and the snares, and then this has like a little longer, so it'll just it'll hold on to the signal a little bit longer. You'll hear it in a sec. Let's just play it while looking at this. So it allows you to just smash the song in the mastering stage, because you're just ducking everything so much for the kicks and the snares, and it'll sound really clean. So yeah, and then another thing to note here is on the ghost kick rack, I've set a pre-delay of 8 milliseconds, and that allows you to have the transient come through even harder, but you have to make sure that you offset these release times. So when you have a pre-delay here of 8 milliseconds, we'll just make it 10 so it's a little bit more easy to explain. If it's 10 milliseconds here, this is actually gonna be a release time of 5, because this is coming in, or this is being seen 10 milliseconds before this actually hits. So this is already going to be triggered, and then it'll only be 5 seconds, and then this one will be 15 seconds. I know it's a little confusing, but play around with it. This is really a powerful technique, and it's been something that's really cleaned up my mixes. So I usually do anywhere from 8 milliseconds to 15 milliseconds. 15 is like a pretty hard delay, and I don't think I would ever do that much actually, but yeah, check it out, try it out for yourselves. I'll just do like an A-B on the sidechain so you can hear what's happening. So I'll turn it off. So it doesn't sound horrible, but when you have the sidechain on, the song just feels more cohesive. It moves together because the drums are being able to come through real hard. So anyway, so now let's dig into some of these drum sounds. I made a pretty simple loop, but everything has its place here. So if we just listen to the drum solo. So I got these kicks and snares from a loop. I forget which pack it's from. I think it's like some 420 drum type of thing. Yeah, here we go. So that's the original loop, and I just cut the kicks and the snares out of it because I liked it, and then made the loop my own by just placing them where I wanted. And this is a technique I use a lot. I'm not really afraid to use sample packs because I usually color the drums differently after I rip the sample up or the loop up. So I know there's a lot of purists out there that would be like, oh, you need to make your own kicks and snares, but I do that sometimes. But if you're not in the mood and you want to just get straight to writing, just fuck around and throw some loops on there, because it'll get you straight to your process. And that's the most important part of all of this, is starting to create. And so by using that loop, I was just able to jump right in. So those are the kicks and the snares. On the kick channel I have just like an OTT, just to kind of bring out the punch in the top end a little bit more. And actually I turn off the highs, so more of the mids actually. So you want to listen to this. Just solo the kick. So it just gives it a little bit more breath on the top. And then have this glue compressor with the soft clip on and dry 100%. So it's giving you a little bit of color. Since I'm taking all the high end out on this OTT, you're getting a little bit of it back because this is going to be clipping it. When you see that little red dot come on, it means it's adding something. So just a little bit of punch on the top. And then this is one of my favorite transient shapers. So basically I'm letting about 10 milliseconds come through before I'm just cutting the sustain. So without this thing, it's a much more boomy kick, and then with it, it's more punchy and quick, and then it allows the impact to be felt more. So that's what this is doing. I realize some of you guys probably won't have this, so I'll freeze all these tracks, and then you can unfreeze and mess with it as you like, but this will probably be missing, so just keep that in mind. We'll move on to the snare. Did a little bit more processing on the snare because the original one was pretty weak. If we just turned everything off, it would sound like this. Now we'll turn on the send too. So not bad, but I wanted to give it a little bit more punch to cut through. It's like a heavier bass drop, so it needs to have more bite. So what I did, just gave it a little bit more punch. And what I did for that, same thing, OTT, took the high end out. EQ, I'm just busting through with like the 300. This is not typical for most snares. This is just something when I was messing with it, I'll just put a loop on right now. I just really like the tone right there. And in fact, you could probably even do something like there and do both. See what that sounds like. Yeah, I don't mind that either, so maybe I'll just keep that. But yeah, it's just mess with this. This is just for making the snare punch through more, giving it more tone, and then dipping it where it doesn't really need to have much because the song is so full with that bass patch. So I'm just trying to cut as much as possible here to let that like kind of breathe. But that's just mud anyway. So that's that, and then a little bit of saturation, no soft clip here, just for a little bit of coloring. And then the transient shaper again here, I have a little bit shorter of an attack time, so probably like 8 milliseconds, and then a little bit more sustain. So we'll just do before and after. It's very subtle. It just gives the front of the transient a little bit more punch. And then I have this reverb rack. Basically, I learned this from the Jaws masterclass. What he does for his reverbs is he creates, instead of adding a send and then adding reverb here, he just he basically recreates sends in the channels themselves. So this chain, I'll put dry here so it's not confusing. This is the dry signal of the snare, and then we have the reverb signal. So I'm able to control the reverb perfectly here as much as I want. So I've got it kind of squeezing a little bit. It's not completely wide. When you have this at 100%, that means it's as wide as it can go, and then you can push it only to the sides by 200. And I'm not really sure what happens when you go to 400, but from my experimentation and such, I've seen that kind of like just makes it louder. So maybe it's just making it louder in the sides. But anyway, 100% is like full normal width. So I just turned this down to 75 to give the snare, the dry signal, more space to breathe on the sides. And then the verb comes in the middle and sounds more natural. So I'll just play this. So you can see it just gives it a little bit more room to breathe on the sides with the dry signal, but that's just my taste. You guys can play with that if you want. And then I set this to negative 2.4 dB. That was just by ear too, so we can do more or less, but that's kind of what this rack does, just sort of emulating a send channel, but on the snare channel itself. So that's the snare. And then we got here, I wanted a little bit of groove when I was making this drop. So I found like a bongo percussion loop. Let's see, I don't even remember what it sounded like. Let's hear it real quick. So yeah, that's the original. Has a little bit of like groove to it. And when you have your drums on the grid, sometimes I like to bring in something with a little bit more of a human groove and feel to it. So that's why I added this. It's very subtle, but it definitely adds that bounce. Let's play the drums so you can hear that. So it just makes it a little bit more natural. And then on that channel, I just kind of EQ'd it a little bit, and that's just the taste. And then this hat loop, nothing on that. Let it through dry. I don't think it needed much. If you don't think something needs processing, don't feel the need to put it on. Sometimes things just sound good out of the box, and that's fine. Cymbals, I usually roll off the cymbals at around like right here. It says a 1.6 kilohertz, but everything down here just becomes a little muddy sometimes, so I just kind of roll that off. Yeah, so it just kind of stays more in the high end. And then this is just another layer of cymbals here, so it makes it sound more hi-hatty. And then here, I had a problem with the high end, so let's just like redo this exercise real quick so you guys can see. Before I had this on, yeah, there we go. So it just sounded a little too bright. So I just, instead of turning down the EQ, I just wanted to smash the highs so they're not so dynamic up there and they can just kind of glue together a little bit. So I did that. And then make sure when you compress channels like that, you see that little number right here is how much gain reduction you're getting from that compression. So make sure you crank the output knob up and compensate for that loss of gain reduction. So that's why here I got 8.6 because I saw about a -9 amount of gain reduction there. So again, I got this a little bit less wide because I'm letting the bass patch breathe. We'll get that in a second. You can see when it's off, it just sounds wider because it's naturally going to be more wide with the cymbals. I used I'll put the link in the description, but a contact library. It's called Stadium Kit. So that's where I got these cymbals from. I just flattened it because I like working with audio with drum sounds more. So yeah, that's the drum group. Let's move on to the actual instruments. I got every instrument in a sidechain group. So that's where the sidechain is that I discussed in the first little portion of this video. And then let's get to that main bass patch, which everybody probably wants to hear right here. So I initially made that in Serum. So let's just look at that real quick. If you guys want me to break down this patch, how I made it in Serum, leave a comment below, let me know. Happy to do that in the next video. Love making these bass patches in Serum and would love to share some knowledge there, but don't want to dive too deep in the weeds in this video. So here is the original bass patch. So all I did was flatten that to audio and then created a new channel with just the audio, and I started chopping it up. So you can see here I chopped it up a little bit, and I'll just do a real quick take a minute and make a new drop so you can see kind of my process here, because I think it's new for some people how you can work with audio. I know when I first saw someone work this way, I was just blown away. So let me just show you guys how I make these drops real quick. So here we go. We just got the flattened bass patch back out from that chopped audio. We'll just listen to solo real quick. So just straight, like a straight blast downwards. So I also got these fills that I've left in. Usually I'll try to add some weird kind of color in between. So this is just like a thing. So I'll cut around that. And then maybe I'll just chop these up, create some movement here. Maybe reverse this. So yeah, you get the picture. Just kind of like messing with this stuff. You can stretch it a little bit too. Mess with the warp modes a little bit. Got another fill down here, so I'm going to clear away for that. So that's kind of how I make drops, and then you can make like A parts, B parts, and keep going from there. But things can get pretty quick when you switch to audio. So that's what I typically work that way. So moving on. So that's the bass patch. Let's look into some of the processing I got going on here. So after I flattened it from the original serum patch, I brought it down here, resampled it, chopped it up like I just showed you. And then I have a filter here going at some points. So just kind of giving it more movement. Because that patch has a lot of top end. So it's nice to kind of like tease it back and forth, give it some tug and pull, if you will. And then that's what that's doing there. This tone shaping, just the EQ, this is just coloring. And what I mean by coloring is the original bass patch needed a little bit of work with its sound. It was just like too full. So I just took out some of these regions. I thought this place sounded cool. Let me just see if I can solo that for you guys. So you see right there is kind of like where the bite is, if you want to see where the mud is. So that's a little bit of mud right there. This is just a little too sharp, so I ducked those, gave it a little bit more top end right here, make it shine a little bit more, and then of course busting it up in the 150 range to give it more body. So that's all before the OTT, which is just giving it like kind of gluing that new sound together. And I just kind of pulled on these bands to taste and arrived at what you're hearing now. But I usually don't just slap an OTT on and just call it a day. I kind of mess with the threshold a little bit. It's fun to shape sounds that way. It's really easy. And then after the OTT, because the OTT kind of like brings everything up, I'm just doing a little bit of mid-side EQing. The sides here needed a lot of cutting, so let me just show you what it sounded like before. It's kind of hard to hear. Maybe I'll just... So the sides are just kind of like a little wild, so I just tamed them down a little bit with that, cutting the top out. Left it in the mids and gave the body a boost at like 174 just to give it a little bit more body there, give it some booty. Then I have an erosion. That's basically just adding some like... if you don't know what this is, it basically just adds some top end wherever you put this yellow dot, and then the farther you put it up, it'll add more. So let's just see what this does real quick. And this works really well right here because I cut so much out of the high end and with this EQ. It kind of adds it back in a more natural way that's not so like clippy and stuff, and it's gonna be really powerful when you need some top end. So check this one out, Erosion. And then I got the same reverb thing going on that I showed you in the snare channel. I'm splitting the dry and the verb signals up so I can kind of like mess with it the same way you would ascend. This reverb, got it going a little longer. I'm cutting the lows out. And I'm also putting it more down the middle because this patch is really wide. I didn't want to have the reverb fighting the original sound for space, so I kind of shot it down the middle a little bit. And you can just do a before and after here. So you can hear it just fits a little better down the middle. Maybe I'll even show you guys this utility on and off. So what you can tell when it's wide, it just fights for space a little bit. And whenever I hear anything fighting for space, even just a tiny bit, I try to like massage it a little bit to give everything its own place to breathe, because that's how you get a cleaner mix. And then this guy, just kind of slamming a little bit more compression into it. It's more of a parallel compressor because I got the dry wet at 56. So just kind of bringing everything back together, because after this reverb, you want to kind of glue it together in that way. And then one more coloring reverb, just real subtle stuff going on, a little bit of mud cleanup right here. I think that same sharp frequency came back in after all of this processing, so I cut it out here. And then a little bit more top end boost. So that's kind of what I did for this. And then after you do that, you can just chop and screw this audio, and you'll have different drops every time you mess with it, and it'll all sound clean. So that's not only my drop writing process, but also a little glimpse into my resampling process too. Would encourage you guys to experiment with that. It's really powerful to resample. Sometimes I'll even, after this, resample it again and again and again, see what I can get out of it, because then you get some really weird shit, and that's what you want. So moving on to the fills. Not much going on here. I just took off the top because these things are really bright. So I have them both in a group, so they all kind of have the same color, all the fills. And individually, I didn't do much to them. They're just, these are samples that I've bounced from other sound design sessions. And since you're going to be downloading this project for free, you'll get these couple of snippets too. I'm going to be putting out some sample packs soon with some of the stuff in it, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, that's all that it is. Just a little bit of kind of call and response, because it's a little boring with just the bass. So in the first half of this drop, I had some fills, and then I let the bass run for the second half. And then lastly, we have this Vox snippet. It's a little Dr. Dre cut I got. I'm
still on.
Just give it a little bit of swag at the end. And all I got for this, just really smashing it, essentially, because the original was not very loud. So we got reverb, giving it some width and depth, saturation, distorting it a little bit. Got a little bit more room reverb. So actually this is more of a room reverb, and this is more of like a longer, shinier reverb. So with those two together, it gives it more depth. Let's just do an A, B of these.
I'm still on. I'm still on. I'm still on. I'm still on. I'm still on.
Might even just leave this one off. That sounds pretty good. The delay is giving it some color too. Essentially riding it down the middle.
I'm still on. I'm still on. I'm still on.
And because I put this before the OTT is going to bring it up and really glue that together with the original to make it sound like it's baked in. And that's what we want. So I got that there. And then on the second one, I just added an octave down.
I'm still on.
Whoops.
I'm still on. I'm still on.
I could probably even bring this.
Still on. Still on. Still on. Still.
Yeah, I'm hearing some stuff now that I'm showing you guys this. Maybe just a little too much high end.
Still on. still low. I'm still low.
See what that sounds like in context.
I'm still low. I'm still low. I'm still low. I'm still low.
Here we go. Sounds a little better.
I'm still low.
So yeah, just when you're mastering stuff too, it's just like little things like that you'll hear as you listen to your thing over and over and over again, and we all know how fun that is. So here is that's pretty much the drop. So here it is again, and I'm gonna A/B it with the reference track. I got an EEPROM track in here. It's always good to have a reference track when you're mixing and mastering, and even when you're producing, because it kind of just lets you jump into another sound palette for a second, cleanse your ears, and then jump back into your project, and you'll know exactly where your problems are in most cases. At least it helps with my projects a lot, because as you listen to your song over and over again, you become more and more used to the sound that you're making. So you can kind of lose sight of whether it sounds good or bad. So having this here is just sort of like a benchmark you can always come back to. And I just have a hotkey of P on my keyboard. So you basically just go up here. I do Command K, and then I just click the solo thing, and then click the key P, because I don't think that has any mapping to it that I use at least. So by doing that, I can just A/B it like that. So when we're playing.
I'm still low.
So pretty close. Obviously his track's a little bit more like bassy. I did this pretty quick, so, but for all intents and purposes right now, I think it sounds pretty good. And then I just got this thing. I don't know how many of you guys use this, but we'll just give it a quick little reading. So around like 5-ish, -5 LUF. And then have one on his track too. And by the way, when you're referencing tracks, always put it to external out, because if you don't do that, it's going to run through your master, and then it's going to add all this processing to that track, and you don't want that because it's already mastered. You're trying to reference against it. So by clicking here, click external out, you'll be able to, when you solo this track, hear it on its own without your processing. So that's what I got here. But on the reference track, I have another U-lean loudness meter just to check what he's got. So let's look at his track. So he's got like -6 LUFs. So we're a little louder technically by the meter, but that doesn't mean anything. You should use your ears. And I think just A/Bing his track and ours. Sonically, they're pretty similar, and I think they fit pretty well. So that's pretty much it. I used the mastering rack that I put up for download a couple weeks ago. The only thing I changed is I added a glue limiter to the end. And essentially what that's doing is the Ableton limiter only can do so much. When you really want to push things, the soft clip is nice because it just adds color while limiting. So you can drive into it a little harder and get a little louder. So that's why I swapped it out for that. So as you can see, it's not doing any compression. I've got the threshold almost all the way down and the soft clip on. So when the makeup gain is increased, you're just essentially adding a little bit of saturation. Cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode of Basecamp. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this project. I'm going to freeze everything because I know there's a couple plugins I'm using in here that you guys don't have. So if you need, I'll also include a list in the description of those plugins so you guys can grab them if you want. And then I'm just noticing actually one thing before I sign off. This send, usually I use a lot of sends. This project I only use one. The snare, basically I wanted a little bit more punch. So I added this send track. So let's just hear what the send track's doing on its own. So just a little bit of like, you can see where it's really boosting that 300 range that I liked, and then cutting that. But essentially just adding a little bit more body to the snare, and I got it wide, so it's adding it to the stereo field. So I think when I added this, I thought the snare was too narrow. And then by adding this, or actually, whoops, let me just A/B it like this. So that's without the send, and then with the send, just gives it more presence on the side. So just noticed that, almost missed that. So hopefully that answers anyone's question about what that's doing. And yeah, if you guys have any questions about this project, you want more of these, you want me to dive into that serum patch that I've made for this project, which I will be including in the download so you guys can break it apart. But if you want an explanation of how I built it, let me know. Would love to dive into that for you guys. So just tell me what you're thinking. Thanks for tuning in this week. We'll hope you're having a good quarantine and staying productive, and we'll see you soon. Peace.